2023. What isn't there to say about last year in gaming? It was one of the most profitable years in the history of games, with some of the highest reviewed titles of all time coming out in the same year. By all accounts, it was a successful year. It was also one of the biggest years for layoffs in the history of the industry. There's entire Wikipedia articles about the game layoffs of 2023 to 2024. The causes, the number of people laid off, the studios involved in these layoffs. It is an extremely well-documented piece of history. Those poor developers put their hearts and souls into making these games, and how did they get paid back? They got fired. It's insane, the number of jobs alone that were lost last year. I think it was something around like 13,000 jobs were lost in the games industry, despite it being one of the most profitable years. That leads me to the whole topic of my video. AAA game studios are stupid with their money. What is the difference between a AAA studio and an indie studio? Well, the number one thing is money. Most indie games are produced by small teams using resources that the employees themselves provide. Like in the case of CD Projekt Red, starting out as an indie studio developing the first two Witcher games, but by the time The Witcher 3 came out, it was basically a full-fledged AAA studio, with the resources and staffing equivalent to bigger companies like EA. Although they didn't have as many branches in their company, the one team that did work on the game in question did have those kind of resources. I mean, one of the funnier examples of this is Life is Strange. It's presented as an indie game, but it was published by Square Enix. So marketing and distribution of the game was handled by a major company, despite the bulk of development being done by a small team without a lot of resources. It's the same reason that you wouldn't call Larian an indie studio, although it is privately owned. And one of the reasons that AAA studios need so much money to develop their games is because they're buying hardware, they're paying for software, they're hiring employees, they're paying for marketing, they are paying for just about everything, using profits from previous games, and sometimes, when they're big enough, they get investors. By definition, indie game studios aren't wasting any money because they don't have the money to waste. They are just spending their own time, their own effort, their own money, and if the game fails, you could call it a waste of time, but not necessarily a waste of money. When a game fails in a AAA studio, it affects hundreds of people, if not thousands. Making video games can be very expensive. If you have ever done any research on the sports games, for example, the licensing fees to use the players and the team names alone cost a small fortune, which is why every year they have to release a new game and get new licensing. And in the past, AAA studios used to make great use of the financial resources available to them, which led to some of the greatest games in history and what solidified these companies as name brands. Masterpieces like Fallout 3 and New Vegas, Call of Duty Black Ops 1, all of the Halo games up until Reach, and the Final Fantasy games up until Final Fantasy X. One of the best examples of a AAA studio making maximum use of all of its resources available is when the first Last of Us game came out. It had groundbreaking graphics, storytelling, exceptional voice acting, and refined gameplay from games that they worked on in the past, like the Uncharted games. Fast forward to Naughty Dog today, who decided that remastering a 4-year-old game was a good use of their resources. They haven't even announced a new project since The Last of Us Part 2 came out. So what happened? Why did the AAA studios start getting so pointlessly stupid with how they spent their money? Well, the honest answer is, they made a ton of money. They made so much money, it's insane. Look at this graph, and look at how much more money video games make year over year. And that number continues to swell. Recently, it passed up Hollywood movies as an industry for making money. They've eclipsed practically every other medium of entertainment as far as financial revenue comes. And it's because of this that the AAA studios basically said, we don't even have to try anymore. Just go to your local game shop. Look at what's on display most of the time. It's going to be those big AAA games. I know a lot of people didn't even hear about Baldur's Gate 3 when it was on its way out, because while it is basically a AAA studio now, it's got nothing compared to the marketing money that EA, Ubisoft, and Nintendo have. Look at the sales of the past 5 Assassin's Creed games. None of them are as highly rated as Assassin's Creed 2 and Black Flag, and yet here they are, still selling like hotcakes, as if the quality never went down. It's part of that whole idea that they don't even need to try anymore. Speaking of Assassin's Creed, I heard this rumor recently. Don't quote me on this, I don't know if it's true. I tried to look it up but couldn't find anything, but I heard that Assassin's Creed Shadows, despite the controversy on Japanese Twitter, is now apparently the #1 best-selling pre-order in Japan right now. Future Mitchell here. I did find the source. It was a Twitter post, so I'm not sure again how accurate this is, but this is where I got it from. I could make 10,000 videos about how much I hate AAA game studios, and it wouldn't even put a dent in their profits. Just the sheer fact that they are releasing a game at all is enough for them to make money. And not just a little bit of money, a lot. And these games are still expensive. Look at the graphics on these things. They're insane. Look at the Hollywood actors that they have starring in them. They're choosing A-list Hollywood actors to be in video games now. That's such a massive waste of resources. I can't think of a single game that was better because of the inclusion of a Hollywood actor than just using a unique voice actor with a unique character design. And despite the fact that these studios were all making enormous amounts of profit while putting in minimal effort to their games, they still had the biggest year of layoffs in gaming history. Why? It's because they're all bloated. They looked at all the developers who were looking for jobs, hired all of them, then sat on them and said, yeah, we're just going to close down 29 different games that we were working on because apparently we're not going to make enough money on all of you, so get out of here. And that's a big waste of money by itself. Imagine all the games that they're not selling because they didn't even make them. They had entire teams working on games that were never released, and they just said, goodbye, see you later, we don't want you. It's so stupid. In short, the games that they're making are too expensive to make now. There's no sense in how expensive they are. They hire hundreds of developers and then don't use any of them. They're making games that need to sell 10 million copies just to break even, and that's just breaking even. That's not helping them pay for new games. That's just saying, okay, we were able to pay our developers and our shareholders. Now, we still haven't made any money yet, and that's just 10 million copies. They need to sell significantly more. And that is also ridiculous. Why would you ever spend that much on something that you guaranteed need this many people to buy without being sure that they will buy every single time that you release a game? They have the big franchises like Assassin's Creed or FIFA that will always sell, but whenever they're working on a new project, that's not guaranteed to sell at all. I mean, sure, look at these trailers. They are absolutely gorgeous. They show you cutscenes from the games themselves, and sometimes it's pre-rendered footage outside of the engine, but it still looks phenomenal. I love the way that you see Giancarlo Esposito giving one of his famous monologues, and it's like, whoa, that's so cool. He's like giving him a grenade and telling him all this cool stuff, and it's supposed to get you so excited for the game. But then the game comes out and it's like, oh, this is just like the previous 4 games you made. Nothing has really changed. In fact, all the other studios are just copying each other now. They see what this studio did and see that it worked, so they just make their own version of it. But the problem is when you're not innovating, when you're not trying to make something new, and you're just throwing money at it as if it's supposed to work, while playing it super safe, you're never going to make anything that breaks out of the mold. One of the reasons why Baldur's Gate 3 was so successful is because people had rarely ever seen anything quite like it before. And this wasn't the first time that Larian Studios had made a major RPG. But the improvements from the Divinity series up until Baldur's Gate, it's incredible. And just look at Nintendo. Look at what they've been doing. Tears of the Kingdom took place in the same exact world as Breath of the Wild, and yet it's still a fundamentally different game. Nintendo succeeds because
It's not about money. It's about sending a message.
they always try something new for every major release they have. Look at the 3D platforming Mario games. There's always a new mechanic that separates it from the previous entry. from Mario 64 to Mario Sunshine, from Mario Sunshine to Mario Galaxy, and from the Galaxy games to 3D World, and from there to Odyssey. There's always something new, always something different that sets it apart from the previous entries. The Legend of Zelda series has also followed in a similar way. Nintendo is using their resources wisely. They are trying to make sure every game feels like a unique experience because it's pointless making the same game twice. Nintendo isn't alone in this. The PS4 era Sony was amazing at innovating games. As mentioned before, the new God of War and Spider-Man franchises were legendary. The problem is that the follow-ups to those games ended up just being repeats of those games. Too many studios these days are patterning their success on movies. A sequel to a game shouldn't be like a sequel to a movie where it's more of the same plus a little extra. It should be something new. If you want to make it like a sequel, do a DLC, because you don't even have to change that much. What happened to the days when a studio would use the resources from the previous game to make a new game, and it only took like a year or 18 months to do? Looking at like Majora's Mask using Ocarina of Time's engine, or looking at Fallout New Vegas using Fallout 3's engine. Those two games use fundamentally different mechanics than the other ones. It's almost like the games industry is trying to be like Hollywood despite having passed it up long ago. Some of these game studios would rather pay millions of dollars to put a Hollywood A-list actor in their game rather than spending that money on making the game actually good and playable when it comes out. I guess all I'm really trying to say is they need to stop. Use their money wisely. People might get excited to see Giancarlo Esposito in a trailer. They're not going to give a crap about that if the game isn't good. And that's not exactly what's making it a better game. They've lost focus on what makes these games better, more playable. Every game should feel different than the last one. Developers shouldn't be hired before they even have a game in mind. And by that extension, they shouldn't be buying game studios if they aren't planning on actually using them. Because that's an even bigger waste of money and everyone's time. I'm just tired of it. I don't think the games industry is dying. I'm not stupid enough to say something like that, because it's making more money now than it ever has before. I guess I'm mostly just tired of franchises that I love not being realized to their full potential. So all in all, I just hope that AAA game studios realize that they shouldn't try to be like Hollywood. They should be like who they used to be. The game developers who changed the industry for everyone. What made them who they are today.
Remember who you are. You are my son.
And yeah, that's all I've got. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment for that algorithm. Alright, till next time.